It's the draft, fellows, coming at you live. Kyle and Andrew breaking down the drive. Prospects to roster, we got the flow. First round picks to the ones you don't know. Talk about the combine, skills on display. Who's rising up and who's falling away. Roster building like a GM in the zone. Kyle, Fellows, Andrew Mertig, they own the phone.
Hey, welcome back to the Draft Fellows podcast. I'm Andrew Mertig. That is Kyle Fellows. And together we are the Draft Fellows. Make sure to follow our channel on YouTube. Or, of course, you can check out the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform. Today, wait, I'm supposed to ask you how you're doing, Kyle, but,
you don't actually, if you don't actually care, you don't have to, take the time.
But I feel like it's polite to ask you.
I'm doing just fine. How are you doing?
Good. Well,
Good.
We may or may not have just recorded a different podcast, so I already know how you're doing.
You already know how I'm doing. Yes, this is true. I'm doing the same as I was 15 minutes ago. Yeah.
We are really in the thick of things. It's weird. The NFL, it's tough because we used to do first, second, third, fourth quarter of this season, and then they added a 17th game, and now I don't know. I don't like fractions. So
yeah, how do we count that? I don't even know.
It's tough to do, but we're a little over a quarter of the way through the season, and so much that to talk about, whether it is the current rookie class or this upcoming 2025 class, which we know a lot more about. I, in fact, just released my top 15 prospects for right now in October. We talked a little bit about a mock draft last week, and so having a lot of fun with that. But it's the thick of football season, and we're going to kind of continue where we've left off the last several weeks. And that is talking about 2024 rookies that we felt like were particularly inspiring or played really well. And so I'm going to go with Chicago Bear quarterback and number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be fair. I've had my fair share of criticisms for Williams. I liked him a lot in the draft, but he was my QB3. He was player 7 or 8 overall. I thought he was a slow processor and tried to play too much hero ball in college. And I thought he's going to have an opportunity to overcome that in the pros. But that had showed up a really big way in the first 4 weeks of the season. So credit where credit is due. He was absolutely fantastic Sunday against Carolina. And yeah, you can take that with a grain of salt because it's against the Panthers defense if you want. But impressive performances by rookie quarterbacks shouldn't be taken for granted. Just because Jaden Daniels is blowing up the world doesn't mean that we should credit Caleb Williams any less for the way he played. Mm-hmm. He was 20 of 29 with a 69% completion percentage. He had 304 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. That 0 interceptions part is really important. But there's some in-depth stats that I wanted to jump into here. So on play action this season, Caleb has a 59.5% completion percentage, 8.1 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. With no play action, his completion percentage is actually a little bit better. It's almost 64%, so about 4% better. But his yards per attempt jumps down to 5.9, so that's 2.2 yards per attempt less, 3 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions.
Huh.
So he's much better with play action. Now, deep throws. This is a problematic area. 23.1% completion percentage on throws of more than 20 yards. 8 yards per attempt, but that kind of makes sense, right? You're throwing deeper, you're going to get more yards per attempt. 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Behind the line of scrimmage, short and intermediate throws. So basically everything that's not a deep throw. 81.4% completion. And that number should be pretty high, but that's very high. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. When he's kept clean in the pocket, 70.5% completion percentage, 7.2 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, only 1 interception. So the synopsis of all of this is if the Bears can do a better job of protecting Caleb in the pocket, if they use more play action, and they throw it deep less often, his results are going to be better, right? It makes sense. And that's sort of a no-duh statement, but the difference between those two things are so drastic And like, yeah, you're not going to be able to play the Panthers defense every single week, but there are signs to be optimistic that things are getting better, that he's starting to slow down, that he's starting to figure things out. And I think if he can speed up his process a little bit while the game slows down in those off script situations, we could see a lot of really good things out of Chicago.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This is not a podcast that was like just in love with Caleb Williams. Like you had him as quarterback 3. He was my quarterback 2 behind actually Drake May, which we are still waiting to see how that's going to pan out, and the grain of salt of the New England offensive line and those kinds of things in tow. But I mean, I'm with you that like this is his best game to date. He did some really impressive things. My takeaway and my synopsis of that is he has really enjoyed throwing bubble screens to DJ Moore. And like, but
That's help. That helps.
Yeah, to his credit though, like Keenan Allen hasn't been healthy, right? Adunze has kind of been in and out of the lineup. So maybe as those guys get a little bit more, available, then maybe that helps some of the downfield, passing and those kinds of things too. But fun to see his development over the last couple of weeks, especially. But I want to talk a little bit about a running back, Tyrone Tracy, the running back for the New York Giants. This is a player just fascinating kind of in the pre-draft process. Devin Singletary's out of this game with a strained groin this past week. Tracy gets the opportunity. He gets 18 carries for 129 yards, right? Averaging 7.2 yards per carry, including 4 runs of over 10 yards on their own. So really, really fun. He's a player that I just was like, I don't know what to do with him because like he's not a classic running back. He has a history that's a little bit more diverse. He was a player coming into the NFL, started his career at Iowa as a wide receiver, transfers to Purdue, kind of hesitantly made that transition to running back. He kind of said, I don't really want to do this. It looks like it's working out for him pretty well now that he's sticking with it there in New York. But in this, like, obviously this is a great game for him. And I thought it was kind of funny in the post game, kind of as they're talking to the coaches and stuff, they're like, hey, what'd you think of Tyrone Tracy and like what he did in the absence of you having like your guy Singletary and those kinds of things? And he was like, yeah, he got a lot of yards. It was kind of like the entire quote from Brian Dable. And so like they're not going to give all the credit to the rookie. They're going to make him earn this. But I just thought it was kind of an interesting quote there, like that they're going to keep him humble. But I do expect Devin Singletary is not a player that you expect to run away with a job. Like he's a guy they brought in because they lost Saquon Barkley, but he's not a guy that is untouchable, right? So I do think that this is a player, Tyrone Tracy, that we're going to see have probably a growing role in this offense, especially because his floor as a receiving back is so high and what he can provide as a former receiver. So fun to see Tyrone Tracy carving out a little bit of a bigger role there in New York.
Yeah, and this is a player I did not like very much pre-draft, so happy anytime I can be wrong. He was an older prospect. I think he was almost 25. And, the position transition, I think maybe a little bit of uncertainty coming out of that Purdue offense. Like, is this guy just a pass catching back? Like, is he only ever going to see third down? And, like, can he hold up in the blocking game? And then it turns out he is just super explosive as a runner, at least, last week. And so that part is really exciting. You'd love to see players flourish when they get those opportunities.
So, that I'm a sucker for the player interviews throughout the process and getting to know these guys, not personally, right? Like I don't get to sit down with them, but taking in those interviews. And it's funny, like, you kind of get sucked in sometimes by some of these guys. A lot of them, like, these guys are all about the same. There's players like Jamal Williams. Like, we all know Jamal Williams does the best interview. It's so much fun. Locker room interviews with the media, those kinds of things. Tyrone Tracy is quite possibly the closest to a Jamal Williams interview without being Jamal Williams that I have seen in a couple of draft cycles. So he was a player that, like, yeah, I like him. Like, he's got, some good skills. Kind of a slippery runner, good receiving option, those kinds of things. Then you turn on the interview and you're like, this guy's going to be an all-pro. Like, he's a lot of fun. And so that's kind of like where I ended up kind of liking him and learning about his story and how it kind of changed throughout college and stuff like that. So good for him and excited to see him finding that success in the league.
That is awesome. We'll have to make sure to check out some more of the player interviews. And like, if you're newer to Kyle and I's content, I think that is honestly like one of the most valuable and unique things that you do is like you really pay a lot of attention to this player interview stuff. And that might seem silly at first, but I cannot tell you the number of players I remember that like ended up hitting and they just had dynamic personalities. And that's something that we don't consider at all. And of course, you have to be a great player on the field. But like, how do you fit in the locker room? How do you develop relationships? How do you gain those opportunities with coaching staffs, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there is some correlation. It's not always the case. Like, you don't have to be a great public speaker to be a great football player. But like, sometimes that like the intelligence that it takes to say the right things in interviews does translate to making the right decisions when you're on the field. So just kind of cool for anybody who hasn't heard all about the Kyle breakdown of the interviews come like February, March, April.
Well, thanks for saying that. And it is one of my favorite things that I get to dig into every winter and getting to know these guys. But I will say, like, it doesn't always matter a lot in early rounds, like kind of players, right? Guys who go early. And I've made some mistakes in my evaluations because I've docked a player for like, you know, I never character shame or anything, but just like some red flags that I'm like, that guy's got some stuff going on, right? But as you get later into the rounds, like guys who are 4th, 5th round picks who get an opportunity, like whether or not a coach likes them means a whole heck of a lot, right? Like, so like, and I think we see that with some other guys in the NFL right now. Their coaches just don't like them. And it's not that they're not talented, but their coach doesn't like them. So it's stuff like that I just find really fun. It's like, okay, are they going to be committed to their craft? And, you know, is the coach going to be convinced that they're going to put the work in? And a lot of times you can tell. And so it is something I really, really enjoy. But anyway, that is the rabbit trail that we went on today. But I'm actually really interested to get into this next portion of the show because this is a player that I've probably watched the least of this position in this upcoming 25 class. So why don't you jump in here and tell us about the 25 player that you're going to highlight today?
Yeah, I'll just say one additional thing about the player interviews. There was a player that I saw. It wasn't necessarily an interview, but it was like a team video released of a quarterback prospect for the 2025 class that I am completely disqualifying as a future NFL starter based on what I saw. And if you can guess who that is, feel free to leave a YouTube comment.
There you go.
Tweet at me. I'll confirm if you're right or wrong. But woof,
is it worse than the Will Levis mayonnaise? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The team issued this video. Like I couldn't believe they allowed their quarterback to look this way. But anyways. Doesn't matter. We're talking about a different quarterback. Cam Ward is not the guy that I'm referring to. Cam Ward has been all of the talk of college football and an absolute miraculous, maybe, dynamic comeback against Cal. It was a very late game if you stayed up for it. A little less so for me on the West Coast, but still, like, absolutely incredible that Cam was able to lead Miami's charge back in this game, and honestly, like, probably pushing him up into that upper echelon of Heisman candidates with that performance. But he's somebody who has leveled up in the collegiate ranks. He started in Incarnate Word. He then went to Washington State. Now he's at Miami. But this is my evaluation. He does a great job of identifying coverages and blitzes pre-snap. He's a really good processor, gets the ball out quickly where it needs to go. He's got a howitzer and can hit throws at all levels of the field. He shows maturity by taking profits where they're available. He can be guilty of throwing at the top speed on all throws. So sometimes he needs to vary up the tempo and layer the ball in a little bit more. But he does actually do a good job in the situation where zone linebackers are dropping into coverage. He can get it up and over the linebackers and underneath the secondary players. When he has pressure in his face, he can make panicky decisions and risk turnovers. We saw some of this against Cal too. There's some really bad to go with the good, although the good far outweighs the bad. When he stays calm, he has good athleticism to escape the pocket and make big plays. Continual development will hopefully allow him to calm his feet and maintain his base. There is a little bit of a more mature Jordan Love to his game. Like Jordan Love, we saw like a really fantastic sophomore season. His junior year was very rocky. I think a little bit of that with Cam Ward, but he came back for another year in Miami. It seems he's taken that next step. He's averaging over 370 yards per game with a 4 touchdown to 1 interception ratio on the season. Of course, like I mentioned before, he capped a historic comeback against Cal Saturday with just huge throw after huge throw. I am very comfortable with him at the top of the draft in 2025. I also really like Jalen Milroe. I think Carson Beck probably is somebody who has slid off of the radar a little bit, but I like Carson Beck. Just depends what flavor you want. But I think that like really top-notch pocket passer who also has the athleticism to be efficient with his legs. I think with Cam Ward, you're getting all of that.
That's super fun. And like I mentioned, this is the player, like obviously we're surrounded by Shedeur Sanders praise from even like big draft media. You mentioned like Beck and Milroe, but this is the guy I have the least amount of exposure to right now just because of the way that the games that I've watched on Saturdays and on weekends have fallen. So really excited to jump in and get to know Ward a little bit more in the weeks ahead. The guy that I want to highlight today is an offensive tackle. And last week we did a mock draft. Andrew did a great job with the first mock draft of 2025 and that cycle. So we had some really good conversations there. LSU's Will Campbell was the only offensive tackle that Andrew had going in the top 10 of that. And this is the guy I feel like has a chance to be maybe above Will Campbell or, like in that same conversation, but we didn't sneak him in to that top 10 last week. That's Kelvin Banks from Texas. And last year's offensive tackle class was absolutely stacked. What this class is going to be like is yet to be seen, but the NFL is absolutely hungry for offensive line help. And so some guys are going to rise to the top of this class. If it's not Will Campbell that goes offensive tackle to, it probably, like I said, is going to be Kelvin Banks. This guy is 6'4", 320 pounds. He's played 32 career college snaps, all at the left tackle spot. So that's super intriguing. He has that experience there on the left side. So far in 2025, he has not allowed a single sack. As of last week, he had earned the second highest pass blocking grade from PFF for the entire season. So if he has a weakness, and he's not a perfect prospect, so a weakness would probably be his run blocking. But we see NFL scouts putting to the side run blocking as a preference to pass blocking. They want to make sure that their quarterbacks are staying upright. So I think that's something that probably evaluators will overlook for his strength as a pass blocker. He's also not the most flexible as an athlete. So those are a couple knocks that he will have throughout the process. But if Banks continues his dominance, the way he's played to start this season, he's a player I do think will get drafted really early in April. I think first round is probably almost a lock at this point and probably could sneak into that first half of the first round for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like Banks plenty. To me right now, he's more of like a mid to late first round pick, but we know with players who have that skill set, if they show continued development throughout the season, if he can start to clean up some of those things on tape, he's going to ascend draft boards like crazy. Mm-hmm. If he tests really well, like forget about it, because offensive coordinators and offensive line coaches around the league are just going to be pounding the table for a big athletic tackle, because there aren't very many of these human beings on earth that can do what a guy like Kelvin Banks can do. And so if he shows a dedication to continual improvement over some of those things, I think he's got a really, really good chance to climb up those draft boards and especially in this draft class, really, push his way into the top 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I wanted to end the show with is a little bit strange, and that is talking about a situation in the NFL. One I think we would probably rather pretend doesn't exist, but that is the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation. And Deshaun Watson, who obviously has the fully guaranteed contract, has been just brutal so far. And so, we won't talk about the off the field stuff, but this is a situation where the Browns really need to move on. Jameis Winston needs to be starting games, but it seems that whether it's ownership or the GM, they're just not going to let that happen while Watson is healthy. So There have been some talking heads around the media landscape and if, football coverage, media and media adjacent that have floated this idea this week that perhaps if the Browns end up really bottoming out this season and having a top 5, a top 10 draft pick, that they could entice some team who has tons of cap space to take on Deshaun Watson, send them their first round pick, potentially a top 5 or 10 pick, and then just get something back like a conditional 7th in return. So basically that team would be buying a draft pick, which by the rules is illegal, but this is a technicality that worked in the Brock Osweiler situation years ago. So what do you think of this? To me, like, which road would you rather take? Would you rather do that, have the contract off your books and be free and clear to do what you need to do? Or would you rather say, we're going to take our medicine with Watson? Either they can't afford to cut him themselves. They cannot. The cap penalty is too severe. But you could have Deshaun as your backup and then just draft a quarterback with this top 5 pick and let them be the starter in Deshaun's place. So, any thoughts on that?
Boy,
I think it's fascinating.
It is. It's fascinating. Like, you want to think that it's not realistic for like a couple different reasons, but like at the same time, like you start to get into the weeds and you're like, I don't know, like maybe like the idea, like first round picks are so valuable. Like top 10, top 5 picks are like almost untouchable. And so the idea that a team could say like, we have a rare opportunity for you to get a pick that you would never be able to touch, not even by trading up, but this is just like outright acquiring this pick is so unique that like it is like, it's an organizational question of like what team could take on the money, what team would take on the cultural risk, and is there like a way that they can bury that cultural risk? Like, like if there were like another suspension possibility, like, so like they could like separate themselves from that. Or like, I mean, there's always the chance that Deshaun Watson in a different situation plays better, but like, it feels like that ship has sailed. And obviously we don't necessarily need to sit here and wish good things on Deshaun Watson's future career either. Like what it seems like that what has come to him like, and it hasn't worked out there in Cleveland. So I don't know, Andrew, like I'm curious your thoughts on this, because like it's hard to wrap my brain around like how this would work, but like we've seen weird stuff happen in the NFL, and desperate teams that are like more than a couple draft cycles away from competing like could do some desperate things to try to rush that process. I can't think of any impatient owners in the NFL. So like, I don't know. I'm curious what you think could happen here.
Yeah, it's interesting because the specific team that was floated was Carolina. And so the idea, I don't know all of the ins and outs of what happens to his contract when he's traded. I just know it's tradable. And then the new team would take on all the future money, and they would be able to cut him for a pretty significant cap hit.
That's crazy
for this current year. And I don't know if they'd have to do it post June 1st or not, but let's just say it's doable, right? So if you're Carolina, you're essentially trading a huge chunk of your available cap space for the first round pick. That's what you're doing. But as a rebuilding team, maybe you take a look at it and you say, okay, well, we feel good about our offensive line. Whether or not they've performed up to standards is a different story. Mm-hmm. But then we could potentially have 2 top 10 picks. We're going to draft our quarterback of the future, the person we believe in. And we're also going to take a tackle and we're going to protect him. Or maybe there's a playmaker that they really love to go out there and match with Xavier Legette and Deontay Johnson. Jadavian Sanders, Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks. Like suddenly you're like, okay, we have a young up and coming offense. Our defense is bad, but we'll worry about that in the 2026 offseason when suddenly we have a bunch of cap room. Yeah. So I could see it from that perspective, but it's just something that would be so unprecedented. But you and I live in sort of this like fantasy land with the NFL. We love talking about like potential things that could happen. So I just thought that this was a really, really fascinating situation.
Well, and I mentioned, like, I can't think of any impatient owners in the NFL. And like, if there's a team and an owner that is so frustrated right now, like, it's David Tepper, right? Like, because they totally botched the Bryce Young thing. They got to get that figured out. And like, they're trying to win now, right? They have a brand new coaching staff that like they think that they believe in, but like they're so far behind the 8 ball. But they thought that they were already like going to be 2 years basically further along than they are, because they thought they were going to hit on the quarterback. So like, it's all right there, Andrew. Like, that's what's like, this should never happen. But like, maybe like in a situation like this, it's a place where like the owner says like, all right, we'll take the PR hit. We're going to do this. And then like, you know, you get yourself a couple of big swings there in the first round. So I don't know, man, like it's going to be wild. You got to think, for the sake of Browns fans, I don't know if we have any Browns fans listeners, like the future, like for them to get to the future faster, I feel like is so worth it. Like if they're able to pull it off.
Yeah, and that's fascinating too, because it's not just like, okay, well, we earned this top pick and we want to use it on a quarterback, and that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
But they are putting themselves in a major bind from a cap situation, not just because of the Deshaun Watson contract, but they have been handing out tons of bonuses left and right the last 2 to 3 off seasons. Mm-hmm. And their team is getting very inflated. Like they're getting in a New Orleans Saints level of problems. Mm-hmm. So I could see them looking to alleviate that contract situation, and then maybe saying, well, as if we have average quarterback play, we know we have the talent in order to do this. Because if you don't do it, looking at the length of the Watson contract and what's left, you're eating into a lot of Myles Garrett's prime, a lot of Amari Cooper's prime if he's still on the team. You know, this defense has tons and tons of young, really talented playmakers, but you just can't go anywhere if Watson's going to play the way that he has. You just can't.
Sam Darnold, starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, 2025. Like, I mean, there's some bridge options that you're like, all right, like nothing is ideal here. We really screwed up handing out this contract, but like there is a way forward. And if you're able to, you know, go through the door a season or 2 early, like maybe that's what you do.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, it has been a fun discussion. We talked 2024 breakout rookies. We've talked 2025 guys that we think are on the radar now and will be as we get to the spring. And we've had a crazy conversation about the NFL and what they try to do with quarterbacks when they don't get it right. So thanks for joining us. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show. From the draft room to the gridiron, the Draft Fellows have got you covered. Make sure you stay with us. Until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.
Kyle got the insight, Andrew brings the heat. Breaking down the roster every single week. Catch us on the podcast, we coming through your speakers. Top picks for practice squad, we got the seekers. Team dynamics, contracts, and the trades. From the draft day excitement to the accolades. Draft fellows on the track, we gone strong. Analyze the plays, we can't be wrong. From the 40-yard dash to the longest throw. We talking pros,